I'm excited too. I mean, we've been building this up, really not me, but Kia's been building this up for over a year now, really, if you think about it, since 2011. And finally, we are ready to have a tech review of the 2018 Kia Stinger. But you know what? In the immortal words of Chevy Chase, it's all ball bearings these days. Well, it's all vents these days. And this kind of gives you a hint of what is about to come. This vent here, as well as two vents underneath the aero panel that stretches the entire car are all functional. And the idea is to route air through here to cool the brakes, to have exhaust of that air here. So all the heated air from the brakes comes out here, and then the ducts underneath the car run the air over the engine to further cool the engine. Now, I don't know about you, but you and I have never seen a Kia that has done that ever before. So with that, a tech review. Now that we got that out of the way, let's focus on what those ducts underneath the car are actually cooling, and that's one of two engines that are on offer. The first is a 2-liter, 4-cylinder, direct-injected, turbocharged gasoline engine. That's good for 255 horsepower. Comes in at a relatively aggressive 6,200 RPM. The torque is 260, comes in at 1,400 RPM, stays flat all the way up to 4,000 RPM. Then there's the engine that you and I are more excited about, and it's the one we've already driven before in that Genesis G80 Sport. It's a 3.3-liter twin-turbo V6. Good for 365 horsepower, comes in at 6,000 RPM, and 376 pounds of torque, comes in at 1,300 RPM, stays flat all the way up to 4,500 RPM. You can have any transmission you want as long as it's an 8-speed automatic that is designed and built by Hyundai Motor Group. Now, this can send the power either to the rear wheels as God intended, or all 4 wheels. In the case of an all-wheel drive system, 80% of the torque in like normal mode is sent to the rear wheels, but then the system, depending on traction, can send up to 50% of the torque to the front wheels. Now, believe it or not, I would argue the interior is more successful than the exterior, as well as some of the hardware underneath. And I realize I'm letting a lot of design nerd fall out here. And it's a whole function of the way they've put this together. The design themes of this wide dash with the combination of some pageantry. And what I mean by pageantry is details like these vents. It's front and center, like they take more prominence than a screen or some of the UX that we've seen very well from other Kias and Hyundais, but here they've wrapped it into a new paradigm, like the satin finish that literally is part of this horizontal line that runs the width of the dash that adds this very clean look. Now, all is not perfect in Camelot, and yes, I am a design nerd, so I would expect a very prominent design detail like this to be repeated throughout the interior. Like, for example, there is this large dash top that accentuates the width of the interior, and if you go out to the outboard vent, it looks like it was designed in a Kia studio circa 1995, where what they should have done was taken this same pattern of the vent, which is repeated back here, made it bigger here and had this dash top terminate into the larger vent, and it almost would be like a piece of jewelry that picks up the satin finish details on the interior, which when you put it all together, truly stunning. The only things that I would nitpick is that vent, as well as maybe some of the tactile feel of the top of the dash and the back of the seats. But wait, there's some more design nerd that needs to fall out here. Toggle switches. I mean, real toggle switches. There's like 4 of them, and then that's combined with the satin finish buttons here. They've gone away from like the temptation of having the unified controller, which just adds, it makes the whole thing more cohesive. Then as we move into the things that make these two cars go around corners, there's a lot to cover, so belt in. First and foremost, McPherson struts up front, 5-link in the rear. Then there's the construction, which they've optimized to impact the driving dynamics, and I know I've told you in other episodes that Hyundai, which owns Kia, is really a steel manufacturer masquerading as a car company. So yes, there's an extensive use of high-strength steel, which makes the car lighter and stronger, but more importantly, they connect all those bits, at least most of it, using structural adhesives. Then there are some specific differences between a 4-cylinder and a GT V6, Let's start with the brakes. In the case of the 4-cylinder, 12.6-inch diameter rotors in the front, 12.4 in the rear. In the case of the GTV6, 13.8 in the front with 4-piston calipers and 13.4 in the rear with 2-piston calipers. The wheels also change in a 4-cylinder 18 inches and a GTV6 19 inches. On top of that, a GTV6 also adds variable steering gear ratio, vented front and rear brakes, as well as a limited slip differential. We'll talk about that last one in the full first drive review. But let's put the name, rank, and serial number of driving dynamics aside and focus on something you don't really get by seeing this thing in video or in pictures, and that's the size. Not a small vehicle. The wheelbase, 114.4 inches, the length, 190.2. As a basis of comparison, that's right about the same wheelbase as an Audi A7, and 2 inches longer wheelbase than a Lexus GS. Or in comparison to one of my favorite 5-door cars von Deutschland, almost 10 inches shorter. And yes, the design nerd details continue in the back. The satin finish wraps around the back of the console as well as contrasting stitching, and the aforementioned vents, a little smaller, but they're still back here. Not design details, but UX details. There is a USB plug so you can plug in your phone. And then this is where I would have the seat. As a matter of fact, that's where I was sitting. And there's still room. I would say on a long distance trip, I'd ask myself to move the seat forward. Satin finish details up here, and then an armrest. I believe that's everything on the inside. Okay, so while I'm being practical, one more thing. Most sedans that you and I drive in this segment, like an E-Class, it's like 15 cubic feet of storage in the trunk. Here, with the seats up, 23 cubic feet, with the seats down, almost 40 cubic feet. Okay, let's see. We've covered the engine, we covered the interior, we covered the driving dynamics. There's something we're missing: the weight. That's where it's a cornucopia of numbers, because there are different versions on offer: 4-cylinder, 2-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, 6-cylinder, 2-wheel drive, all-wheel drive. The lightest version, 3,611 pounds, that's a 4-cylinder, 2-wheel drive. Make the power go to the front wheels on a 4-cylinder, it goes up to 3,826 pounds. Then move to this 2-wheel drive, 3,792 pounds. Again, power going to the front wheels as well. 4,023 pounds. Not exactly a lightweight, especially when you consider most of this, 55%, is constructed of high-strength steel. Now I'm going to leave you with those numbers as a cliffhanger until we reconvene in the full first drive review of this very car here, which is a twin-turbo V6 rear-wheel drive, which, if I'm honest, that's the best derivation of the Stinger, but we'll talk more about that in the full first drive review. In the interim, I do want to leave you with a question, and this is an unusual one. Do you remember that RF, the MX-5 that we drove that me and Kumo completely fell in love with? That color, very similar. That color is called ceramic. This is called, I think, cosmic or ceramic gray. It's not a great name. The Koreans not good at the name for the colors. So I've been debating with some of the folks at Kia, and we think it should be called ceramic or wet cement. That's the one we all like the best, wet cement. So we are going to turn this around to you, because we could not agree amongst ourselves. What do you think this color should be called? And note, it has a little metallic in it. It's not a flat gray. It's not like that Nardo gray that you see on the Audis that I know some of you guys have commented on Instagram about. So let me know in the comments below, or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And until I see you next time in the full first drive review of a car I am incredibly excited to drive, bis später.